France is one of the biggest countries in Europe, not only by size, but also in terms of military capabilities and, more importantly, its nuclear arsenal. But what the French plan to do with these nukes has seriously stunned the United States, perhaps even rendering its support useless after the recent political upheaval. New reports have emerged suggesting that what France plans to do might not only hurt Russia, but could ultimately remove the need for any U.S. troops or even military support for the future. Even future German Chancellor Frederich Merz seems to agree. Should nuclear sharing become a thing in Europe, it might render President Donald Trump's antagonistic stance on NATO useless and break European dependency. But how does it work? The nuclear umbrella, as it is often referred to, is an accepted stance that has been protecting Europe since the dawn of the Cold War, with the United States being one of the biggest producers of these weapons. Europe has been relying on them for protection. While the exact number of these weapons stationed in Europe is unknown, it is suspected that the continent has at least 6 different storage sites containing these U.S. weapons. These sites can be found in various countries, including Italy, Germany, and Belgium. However, Donald Trump has been threatening to not support Europe unless it meets the agreed 2% of GDP spending on its defense. This has posed a massive risk, especially with Russia changing its nuclear policy in recent months. Should the United States remove its nuclear umbrella over Europe, it will leave the continent vulnerable. As of this video, only France and the United Kingdom have nuclear weapons of their own, but this does not extend to the rest of Europe, for now. But even before the German elections, French President Emmanuel Macron had been talking to Frederich Merz. The two supposedly discussed what would be coined as nuclear sharing. Macron proposed that the UK and France should be sharing their own nuclear weapons to create some kind of umbrella. In layman's terms, this would serve as another Article 4, which is currently contained in NATO. Under the agreement, an attack on one is an attack on all. It suggests that, should one NATO country be attacked, the rest are forced to respond. Now, such a nuclear agreement would work similarly. If Russia attacks any European country in a nuclear capacity, both France and the United Kingdom will be forced to respond. This will essentially stop Russia from progressing any further in Europe than Ukraine, facing the risk of mutually assured destruction. The move, which is unprecedented, will essentially break Europe's dependence on the United States when it comes to its defense. Under this agreement, or MAD for short, any country that sets off a nuclear weapon will immediately face a similar and direct response. This ensures that both countries will be wiped out in the end. Now, this doesn't provide any conventional warfare support or defense to Europe. The US still has about 100,000 boots on the ground, spread throughout the continent. Some of its biggest bases include Camp Darby in Italy and the infamous Ramstein Air Base in Germany. This makes up the bulk of US troops, with a further 10,000 supposedly stationed in Poland. However, nuclear deterrence will do wonders to ensure that Europe does not need to rely on these US troops, a move highly supported after recent outbursts and threats from President Trump. For years, Europe could rely on its partner across the Atlantic. The idea was that Europe could save on its own defense and use these funds to ensure the welfare of its citizens. Since Trump came into office, this has not been the case, and the US president is trying to break free from various US obligations made by former administrations. A move that would allow nuclear sharing across Europe will inevitably create a bit of breathing room for a struggling European Union, which is now scrambling to rearm itself. But will Russia even dare go this route? Before we find out, make sure to subscribe to our channel for your daily military report. Since the start of the Ukraine war in 2022, Russia has been threatening nuclear war. It seems like whenever President Putin suffers losses on the battlefield or cedes some territory, the Kremlin reverts to threatening the world with nuclear war. Non-strategic Russian nuclear arms have been deployed to Belarus as a way of further intimidating the West and ensuring that perhaps the West would back off from its support to Ukraine. The plan has not worked so far. However, President Putin made Russia's boldest move to date in September 2024. The new policy states that Russia could launch nuclear weapons in response to an attack on its territory by a non-nuclear armed state backed by a nuclear-armed one. Let's unravel this a bit more. Under this new doctrine, Russia may now launch a nuclear retaliatory strike on any country that backs Ukraine to attack its territory. This was in direct response to the Kursk offensive. Ukraine gained large swaths of territory in Russia during 2024. While they have been pushed back quite significantly at the end of the year, Ukraine still maintains a faint presence in the area. Furthermore, this change in doctrine was not yet adopted by Russia, but sat as an idle threat. Well, this was until U.S. President Joe Biden gave Ukraine the green light to fire the ATACMS missiles. Ukraine didn't have anyone waiting on them, firing the first such missile on November 19th. The same day, Russia officially adopted this doctrine. But are these ATACMS any threat to Russian sovereignty? The ATACM, or MGM-140, Army Tactical Missile System, is a supersonic ballistic missile which is designed by the U.S. defense company Ling-Temco Vought Ltd. It was subsequently acquired by Lockheed Martin, which continues to develop and sell them. These missiles are about 13 feet in length, with a diameter of 24 inches. Its longest-range variants can travel up to 190 miles, allowing it to strike deep into the western portion of Russia. This poses a massive risk for Russia, which stations a variety of its combat aircraft within the 190-mile range from the Ukrainian border. Hangars around Kursk and Voronezh are some of the primary targets, which naturally will eliminate a large chunk of the Russian Air Force. Essentially, Vladimir Putin had no choice but to ready his nukes to threaten the West to back off. Under the Biden administration, this threat didn't seem to hold, but with President Trump now in control, it seems to have much more of an effect. With Trump essentially pausing aid to Ukraine, the country doesn't know whether it will ever receive more of these ATACMS, shifting the advantage back to the Kremlin. But what does this nuclear change mean for the West? And does Russia actually have nukes that could penetrate deep within Europe? As of 2024, it is estimated that Russia has approximately 5,580 nuclear weapons at its disposal. This is split between conventional weapons and strategic weapons. In terms of actual deployed nuclear weapons that are ready to fire at any moment, Russia has about 1,700 of these strategically placed. This is more than any other country in the world, and more than the United Kingdom and France combined. The missile Europe fears the most is the Oreshnik, which is essentially derived from the RS-26 Rubezh IRBM. This missile was initially tested, but never brought into service. However, November 21st, 2024, was the first time the Oreshnik was seen in action. It was fired in response to the ATACMS hitting Ukraine's PA Pivdenmash facility in Dnipro. However, this time it was not loaded with nuclear warheads, but Russia has confirmed that the Oreshnik can certainly be used in such a capacity. The Oreshnik by itself doesn't look impressive, but when you peek underneath, it becomes a scary monster. It has 3 stages, with the first one loaded with solid fuel. Once the missile is launched, it is propelled into the atmosphere, where it activates the second stage to eventually reach orbit. The missile then disposes of the second stage, creating an arch and turning itself back to Earth. What's really impressive is the fact that it reaches a top speed of 7,610 miles per hour. This is essentially Mach 10 and almost double the speed needed to reach hypersonic. It means that once the missile is launched, it becomes almost impossible to shoot down. When it re-enters the atmosphere, the Oreshnik opens its final stage. Within this stage, there are usually 6 warheads, but it can be fitted with nuclear warheads if needed. This multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle, MIRV, is what truly makes the West worry. Each of the independent warheads can be adjusted to have a different target, and with mini thrusters on each, it becomes quite a pain for the Patriot missile to intercept. The ordnance carried on each of these missiles is still under debate, but Western experts agree that its payload could be more than a ton when launched. Russia has stated the Oreshnik can reach about 3,100 miles into Europe. This means that a missile can easily reach across Europe and hit the United Kingdom if it needs to. Moreover, Russia claims that it will outmaneuver the US-designed Patriot missile, which is the last defense that Ukraine is currently relying on when it comes to air defense. Fortunately, experts believe that the Oreshnik does have one fatal weakness. This is during the initial launch phase when the Oreshnik is moving at its slowest speed. According to experts, air defense missiles will need to down this Russian nuclear weapon upon its launch, but it is almost impossible to know when and from where the Russians will deploy them. On top of this, Russia has the more popular RS-28 Sarmat. This is a more conventional missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads. The RS-28 Sarmat is considered an intercontinental ballistic missile featuring a similar three-stage propulsion method. According to Russia, the missile has been in service since 2021, but it is still a work in progress. Its nickname, well, that's rather interesting. The general public has coined it the Satan II, in direct reference to the SS-18, Satan ICBM, which has been the flagship Russian ICBM that has been in service since the 1970s. However, the Satan II, as we will refer to it from now on, is not designed for regular warfare, but mainly as a way of creating a threat to other continents like the Americas. Russia claims it has a minimum range of 6,200 miles with a maximum range of more than 11,000 miles. This essentially means that if the missile is launched from the eastern front of Russia, it could theoretically hit anywhere in the United States, including the US capital of Washington. However, much of this is still speculation and part of various propaganda spread by the Kremlin. So, what does Europe have to stop this? ICANN estimated that France has about 290 nuclear weapons, with another 225 held by the United Kingdom. A large contingency of this is made up of naval nuclear weapons, with a few more stationed throughout the countries themselves. Europe's nuclear missile readiness is currently unknown, but it is not even close to what Russia can launch at any given time. The B-61 gravity bomb is a US nuclear weapon mostly stationed in Europe. Only about 100 of these bombs make up the US nuclear umbrella, but they are severely limited. In fact, the B-61 can only go as far as the aircraft carrying it, and it will need to be deployed directly over the target. This makes it incredibly hard to know exactly whether Europe can engage in a tit-for-tat nuclear war with Russia. None of Europe's land-based ICBMs capable of carrying nuclear warheads can reach hypersonic speed, making them somewhat vulnerable to interception. If interceptor aircraft do not do this, the S-400 surface-to-air missile is one of the most advanced air defense systems, especially in the Russian configuration. The export configuration, which was sold to Iran, didn't prove useful in recent Israeli airstrikes, which has been a bit of a shock to Russia. But within the Federation, these systems are far more advanced. It is expected that it should be able to handle a few European ICBMs. So, what does the French and UK nuclear umbrella provide to Europe? And why will it work? Even though it might seem like Europe doesn't stand a chance to fight Russia in a nuclear war, it still can do a lot of damage. In fact, Europe doesn't need to wipe out Russia. It only needs to hit a few strategic targets. This can easily be done with the assistance of the United States and possibly Israel. However, Israel keeps a policy of not confirming nor denying the fact that it has any nuclear arms. But let's look at a current hypothetical scenario. Let's say that Russia launches a nuclear attack on Poland. Should this happen, Article 4 of the NATO agreement will immediately kick in. This means that Europe and the United States will now need to respond to Russia, but many of them are not willing to respond in any nuclear capacity. Why should they? If, for instance, France responds with a nuclear strike, Russia will once again escalate by retaliating with another such strike. Yes, Russia will certainly take a lot of damage, but now both Poland and France could be wiped from the map. However, the shared nuclear umbrella means that other EU countries now have access to these weapons. They can deploy a response of their own, essentially not dragging the rest of the world into a nuclear conflict. France has recently touted sending nuclear-capable aircraft to Germany, which will be under the control of the non-existent German Air Force. If this can be done throughout Europe, it will make Russia think twice when all its enemies now have direct access to its own set of nukes. Such a move also renders the United States useless, meaning that Europe no longer needs to depend on US defense capabilities. But why is this so simple? Well, the threat of nuclear retaliation is one reason why countries like North Korea and even Iran want to develop advanced arsenals. The thing about having nuclear weapons is not that they should be used, but rather to present a form of deterrence to countries looking to attack. Most countries reserve the right to immediately deploy a nuclear weapon if they feel threatened, or if they are attacked on any level that will undermine their own sovereignty. Essentially, if every country had its own nuclear arsenal, it means that no one would be willing to take on the other and escalate to nuclear warfare. So, why is the United States stunned by this development? On the current global stage, the United States is firmly in control. It has the biggest and most advanced military, if we look at firepower, and holds the second most nuclear weapons. Once Europe takes such steps, it immediately removes the leverage that the United States holds over these countries. This creates a major problem for President Donald Trump. Since his inauguration, Trump has been focused on rebuilding the United States, but all of this comes at the cost of other countries. The US has managed to ensure that many of its allies are not only forced to support it, but also somewhat dependent on the country. In layman's terms, this creates a lot of leverage for Washington in forcing policy that it deems beneficial to its own foreign needs. A move like this will allow Europe to actually break its dependence and isolate the US even further than it has been isolated so far. But is this even possible at the current rate things are moving? Well, the United States is firmly focused on bringing peace to the European continent, but it is not the kind of peace you imagined before the war started. The US wants to get its hands on Ukrainian minerals, and this will once again give the US power, which again becomes leverage over its opponents and allies. To deploy large swaths of weapons across Europe will cost the EU quite a bit, and this will in turn reduce its capability of focusing on rearmament. EU President Ursula von der Leyen recently announced that Europe is now in an era of rearmament, and this will cost a lot of money. This strategy Macron has proposed, and many other EU countries have accepted, will take time to implement, and this is what Europe currently does not have. In the coming months, the EU will need to deploy more and more aid toward Ukraine, especially with the current pause on aid coming from the United States. Such a move will inevitably delay the possibility of a move like this ever happening. It is safe to accept that at least a few French and British nuclear weapons will be moved throughout Europe, but this will not be enough to deter Russia. The hypersonic capabilities of the new Oreshnik do prove a unique threat, and one that has significantly boosted the confidence of the Russian leader. Is there another solution? Well, Europe could share nuclear production capabilities. With most countries now increasing their defense spending, other EU countries might need to develop their own nuclear arms, a problem that once again will enrage Russia, but also increase nuclear stockpiles around the world. In fact, the world already has more nuclear weapons than it needs. Just a few is enough to destroy the entire planet many times over, and this is a real possibility given the current state of international relations. Moreover, China is another wild card many often don't mention. Despite having limited nuclear weapons, it still holds the third most, according to various experts. With the current BRICS alliance and exceptional trade partnerships between Beijing and Moscow, it is safe to say that a doomsday scenario would see China side with Russia. Now, the United States will need to avert such a significant escalation, and this will dramatically affect the current stance of the US government. But what do you think? Will nuclear sharing across Europe actually help anyone? Well, a lot still needs to happen. But what is clear is that the EU is certainly taking steps to break its dependency on the United States, and perhaps even create its own nuclear umbrella. How will Washington respond? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to like this video and subscribe for your daily military report.